This video is brought to you in part by AdGuard VPN. More on them in a bit. Futurama is one of those TV shows that just doesn't die, or I guess rather, it finds a way to keep clawing its way back onto the air, and thankfully it's one of the few shows that also doesn't overstay its welcome while doing so. Despite having 4 different finales thanks to constant fear of cancellation, to the point that the writing team just started assuming that every season would be the last one, the show managed to last an impressive 140 episodes, and that's not even counting however many seasons and finales they pull out of this current Hulu run. Well, actually 141. What you may not know is that there's a lost episode of Futurama, an officially created, complete episode of the show that has never aired on television. Produced between the 3rd and 4th seasons of the show prior to its first cancellation, it's been referred to as the lost 73rd episode by showrunner David X. Cohen. It features the original voice cast. Hell, it was written by the same writer responsible for the Emmy-winning Roswell episode. Outside of the 4 movies that made up the show's original 2008 revival, this is the longest Futurama episode 2, about 10 minutes longer than the usual 22-minute runtime you'd expect. You can probably guess where I'm going by this point, but as a bonus, meticulously cut in between this episode's scenes is a video game, a 3D platformer made by a Swedish studio you've never heard of, a studio that after this never made another game before shutting down, and a game that was sent out to die with a limited print run only days after the show's final episode had aired. And surprisingly, it's not bad. It's not great, certainly not worth the several $100s it'll cost you to buy and play it, and while you could just go out and buy one of the movie DVDs to get a recut of this episode as a special bonus feature, you don't even know what a DVD is anymore, so I'm here to save you the trouble. This is the video game officially referred to as Futurama: The Lost Adventure.
To the ship!
Futurama the game has roots that go almost as far back as the very start of the show. See, the original mind behind The Simpsons and Futurama, Matt Groening, at 2000's Comic-Con mentioned in passing that a game based on the series could come to the new generation of consoles, although Fox didn't publicly confirm this at the time. A few months later in September, a Swedish game developer named Unique Development Studios announced that it had acquired the rights, having first approached Fox and Groening a month prior to that Comic-Con tease. They also said that the plot of this game was focused around shampoo, which, well, if that's not a joke, that definitely changed. Around the same time, it was noted that this was part of a 3-game license, and Fox's press statement implied that one of the games would be for Game Boy Advance. As amazing as the idea of Bender drinking beer and burping fire on the Game Boy Advance is, that never came to pass, nor did this game's planned GameCube release, as that system sales weren't impressive enough to justify porting the game over. Initially, the first video game in this deal was planned for a first half 2002 release, which also didn't come to pass, perhaps due to some producer hiccups. Now, I say producer and not production because Matt Groening and the show's co-creator and showrunner David X. Cohen both acted as producers on the game. Actually, Groening is funnily listed in the credits as executive game designer, which is, I don't think he's probably qualified for that one, but I appreciate the gusto.
Executive?
It's a meaningless title, but it helps insecure people feel better about themselves.
This episode's writer, J. Stuart Burns, noted that at one point when they received some footage of the game, Groening passed along a note that said something to the tune of, and I'm quoting the writer's memory here, "This looks awful. It should look better." And not long after, it apparently looked better. Now, there was definitely a lot more involved than just that note, but it's really funny to me considering the guy was probably dunking on very early placeholder assets. Between that and Groening's kids being featured in the special thanks of the game's credits, which I'm guessing means they may have helped playtest the game at some point, it seems that Groening had a more vested interest than you might expect, considering the state of most Simpsons games. Perhaps it was because of those games that he stepped in more firmly and demanded stronger quality, who knows. Whatever the case, the game didn't release until August 2003 on PS2 and Xbox, 18 months after Fox had announced that it wasn't going to pick the show up for a 5th season. Considering that the game was released 2 days after the, at the time, final episode aired, you can't help but feel that the game was continuing production all the way through the 11th hour. To call the Futurama game's reception middling might be a bit generous, but the unanimous belief between critics and players alike was that the writing was top-notch and that it at least lived up to the goal of feeling like a playable episode of the show. Probably not a good final episode, though. Developer UDS would end up shutting down the following year, although this game's performance, interestingly, didn't have a hand in that. Somehow this game, according to Groening and others from the show side, it met or exceeded sales expectations. Now that might come as a surprise to those of you that know about Futurama's rarities. See, this is one of the most expensive games out there for both systems on which it released. The common understanding was that the game probably had a limited print run, and that was why it was so rare, in part because the show was already halfway down the drain into Old New York for over a year before the game even entered printing. For a while, only the North American copies were all that expensive, and to this day, you're lucky to find a copy in the States that goes for under $200. But since then, the UK copies have also jumped up in price, and since both the PS2 and Xbox are region-locked, your only options for playing this game are to mod your system and buy one of those UK copies, which is even then rare to find online and still goes for upwards of $50+ if you're lucky, or to emulate it.
Illegal downloading. Stop it already!
For Futurama to have met its sales goal would probably mean that it sold the, 10 or so copies they made worldwide, but it's still interesting to hear that it did sell better than expected, since the perception is always that the game was a total bomb. A little bit fittingly looking back, given the cyclical nature of the show getting cancelled and uncancelled again and again and again, the plot of this game is focused around a time travel loop. And now that the history of this episode is out of the way, let me be clear, I don't think I'd be covering this game if it didn't live up to that lost episode moniker. Short of having an actual time machine and going back to force Fox to end its Don't Cancel TV Shows impossible challenge, this is the closest recapturing to those first few seasons of Futurama that you can get, and surprisingly for a licensed tie-in, it does so without relying too heavily on just throwing a bunch of references in your face and making sure you understand them. Instead, most of those little Easter eggs and gags are left to the loading screen advertisements, or snuck into the levels themselves as an organic part of the world. Stuff like fully functional, let's call them telephone booths for the sake of my ad revenue. The cutscenes are often packed full of that quick, punchy banter that made Futurama feel so unique, and packed with sight gags like the corner of the universe being a literal corner. It's such a true Futurama experience through and through that the credits theme, made by the show's composer along with the rest of the game's music, is directly used in the Futurama movies a few years later. This was the first full Futurama theme we got, and it was made for a video game. That soundtrack, by the way, not every song is a banger, some are a little bit weird, but the tracks that do hit, man, they are phenomenal. I'm not usually one to call out video game music in my videos, but I stopped a couple times because these tracks would feel like dead ringers for stuff from the PS2 Ratchet & Clank games, and that just kind of broke my brain a little bit. The only exceptions to this quote-unquote episode feeling like a true 73rd episode are the absences of characters like Hermes and Amy, both of whom are left out to keep the voice budget on the trimmed side. Now, of course, it's not like there weren't episodes of the show proper that had a limited cast, and Hermes, to be fair, is silently here in the first level, but he's got a brain slug on him as a fun little workaround so that he doesn't have to speak. It's just a tad more noticeable here when most of the game focuses around only 4 people, voiced by 3 people, in a series with such a rich cast of frequently appearing side characters, all again voiced by mainly 1 or 2 of those same people. Like, at points I would feel like somebody like a Lur or maybe somehow Calculon could show up for a line or two, considering that their voice actor is already one of the 4 or 5 people used in the game. The second exception is the frequent enough string of fourth wall references to this being a video game, most of which ended up being removed when the episode was recut for the DVD release. The plot of this game focuses around Farnsworth selling Planet Express to MomCorp.
Are you off your nut, Professor? How could you sell the company to Mom?
I had to. We've been losing money. Plus, you 3 never actually charged anyone.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry.
Only to find out that now that she owns more than 50% of Earth's companies, she's somehow taken over as the supreme ruler of the entire planet to enslave the entire population. When the crew goes to flee, they find that the ship has been heavily damaged.
It wasn't me this time, I swear!
So the good doctor tasks Bender with bending things back into place, Leela with doing the rest of the fixing, and then he sends Fry to find a hammer so that he gets out of the way. This reanimator is the game's fun way of explaining the player being able to respawn. That part's not really what I'm talking about when I mention fourth wall video game references. In fact, this giant toaster is worked in organically enough that they make Leela drag it around with her in a cutscene right before her chapter, which is a great dumb little thing to show 2/3 of the way through the game right when you've stopped thinking about it. Instead, the fourth wall stuff I'm referring to is usually in between each character's section of the game, where Farnsworth will say,
Yes, you're a playable character.
This is the happiest day of my life.
It's definitely not a huge deal or anything, it's just maybe a little bit on the lazy side for a usually ambitious writing staff, and it's the main thing that can take away from this feeling like a true, seamless episode of the show, which again is in part why when they did turn this into an episode of the show, they recut around those sorts of references. And it's how well the game often captures that Futurama vibe, that Futurama essence, that almost makes me go easy on it in my mind whenever I'm thinking about my time with the game. Almost. We'll get into that a bit later, but first, Futurama the game is, as you can see, a 3D action platformer that splits its 22 levels into 4 major sections featuring 3 major characters. For the first 7 levels that make up Act 1 of the game, you'll play as Fry, first giving you the chance to explore the Planet Express building, which, by the way, is just fantastic, and then turning into a not very good third-person shooter once he's tasked with retrieving the ship's backup dark matter engine for Farnsworth.
Don't we have a backup engine?
We did, but we never used it. It being backup and all, so I pawned it. You pawned it? Why? For the same reason everyone pawns everything in America. To get a gun.
It's kind of a shame that this first part of the game ends up feeling the most like a drag to actually play, because it's the chunk that takes place on Earth in New and Old New York, the parts of this universe that are the most fleshed out, the stuff that you would probably want to explore the most. And although it sounds contrary to being kind of a drag, it's also the main chunk of the game itself that feels the most Futurama-esque, thanks in part to the game's weird, sometimes kind of bad level design. In Fry's levels, you'll work through the sewer system, make your way into Old New York subway tunnels and then Old New York proper, before coming out at the red light district and opening fire on hordes of robot gangsters, as well as Mom's robot death squads patrolling the streets. Now, when I say the level design is weird, kinda bad, and yet also Futurama-esque, it's because the levels themselves successfully capture that lived-in vibe. They don't tend to look or feel like video game areas as much as actual blocks of a city, with Fry just kinda stumbling his way through them by climbing over parked trucks across fences, or walking across ventilation systems, or even the city's transport tubes. In the sewers, you might be tasked with turning on or off some pipe valves to open the path forward. In Old New York, Fry talks about the basketball court where he first got mugged. Fry will just chime in every now and then on his surroundings, and the game kinda just takes on the low stakes befitting of a bumbling idiot described in the game's manual as Intergalactic Delivery Boy, formerly Pizza Delivery Boy, formerly Boy. It really starts to hit its stride in the red light district level, but by the time you're there, Fry's section of the game is pretty much done. Between all of this and the bevy of random interactable objects that adds some texture to what easily could have been an empty world, the secret areas that often hide a collectible nibbler that are kinda really fun to figure out, there's just a charm factor here that masks some, but definitely not even close to all, of the issues present here at the start of the game. For an example of one of those issues, the controls here feel like they were designed in that weird PS1 era before controls had really normalized for 3D games. Like, the jump button here is circle, as if this Swedish studio followed the original Japanese intent of circle being the main action button and not X. X is then shoot in Fry's case, or attack in the other character's case, and L2 and R2 cycle you through his different weapons one by one, only to then not be used pretty much at all for Leela or Bender. Even once you get used to the muscle memory of the controls being a little funky, the game is woefully optimized, and Fry's sections show that the most. The game somehow starts on its weakest foot first, twists its ankle, and then hobbles for the remaining couple hours of the short runtime, never able to fully recover. Through Fry's level progression, you'll start with a laser pistol and that hammer that killed him at the start of the game, before adding to that arsenal quickly with a shotgun and then a machine gun in the levels after that, with each new weapon slowing the game down more and more when fired. It just gets less optimized the further into Fry's gameplay you get. Now, these new weapons at first would seem to be a welcome improvement to having to slowly shoot each enemy 5 to 10 times with a pistol, all while standing still and just watching them meander towards you and cause you no direct threat, but then the enemies start getting more involved right as you're getting these new weapons, and having to dodge enemy fire in small corridors isn't really all that fun when the game's going at less than half speed, even when you emulate it. I enjoy the touch of some enemies falling over and taking one last potshot towards you once they're defeated, but it's sort of soured by the game quickly defaulting to throwing more enemies at you than the game can physically handle as the only way to introduce challenge. I guess, if nothing else, it does help drive home the whole mom hunting down dissidents with robot death squads thing.
Okay. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have sold her Planet Express. Must be my hind cataracts.
With MomCorp in complete control of the entire world, you would really want to be careful not to let them see your search history, or else they're gonna pound you into the ground with commercials. Thankfully, today's sponsor, AdGuard VPN, is here to help. See, every time you're online, even right now watching this video, you're leaving behind some trail of data. Each step on that trail loses you some of your privacy, and that info is almost always going to end up in an advertiser's hands. That's why AdGuard's got a proprietary built-in ad blocker that doesn't require you to install a separate plugin or a bunch of messy apps across all of your different devices. Just connect to the VPN and you're set. Whether you're at home or on public Wi-Fi, AdGuard will keep you secure, and they've got a strict no-logs policy as well, so your personal data is not being touched one bit. With over 1,000 servers across 6 continents, AdGuard even allows you to access geo-blocked games or shows, and it'll ensure that you can watch or play without any fear of your bandwidth being throttled by your local MomCorp ISP affiliate. And best of all, AdGuard's partnered up with me here to offer all of this for as little as $2 a month. Usually their 2-year plan goes for $71.76, but if you click the link in the description or use the code TheGoldenBolt at checkout, you can get a whopping 83% off your overall subscription cost. That's only $48 total. That's a limited offer too, so once it's gone, it's gone. Thanks again to AdGuard for sponsoring this segment, and now, back to the video. The final on-foot fry level has a couple more open areas, and by more open I mean an empty city street that happens to stretch more than 20 feet in front of you, and because of that the slowdown gets even more egregious. The finicky camera controls compound these issues in the more close quarters areas, often struggling to stay behind you in the smaller rooms and corridors where the game doesn't slow down as much, and again, then still throwing enemies at you anyway to make sure that the game does slow down almost as much. And then there's the platforming itself, which just does not feel all that good. You have a good amount of control in midair, but the game frequently does that licensed game faux pas of putting you onto very thin walkways all the time, or in this particular case jumping onto the backs of sewer crocs and slipping off into instant death slime due to poor collision detection. Now, the game is very forgiving with lives, as collecting 25 of each character's money collectible gives you an extra life. That's dollar bills for Fry, which are actually spendable at Slurm vending machines, which is kinda neat, Robonium crystals for Bender, and gold bars for Leela. However, the respawning itself is awful. There are usually frequent enough checkpoints, but respawning completely resets the progress of any collectibles you've obtained since that checkpoint. Based on the end level screen showing you whether you've collected every nibbler or dollar, your first platformer instinct is probably to try and collect everything, but as early as level 2, the game asks you to wait an extended amount of time for sewer crocs to pass by again and again in opposite directions, so you can Frogger over them back and forth to collect every last dollar, punishing you for the game's poor controls by respawning you and telling you to collect every last thing all over again while waiting several minutes between platforms while doing so. And I'll say they made their point pretty successfully. I quickly gave up on going for 100% like I usually try to do with most games because I'm insane, and I chose to just try and collect all the hidden nibblers because they were usually fun to collect for the first level or two, but even then, after a while I would only try for each one once because the game likes putting them at the end of very narrow walkways too. These sentient dark matter pooping machines, they start as a fun hidden collectible that feels rewarding to grab, but then almost immediately ends up feeling like a chore. And here is a fun spoiler for you. There is no true reward for getting all of them. Even though they appear to be tracked on the end level screen, collecting all of the money or defeating all of the enemies in a level, neither of those do anything, and collecting all of the nibblers in a level unlocks the cutscenes in that level, if there are any, as well as the loading screen for that level. You know, the static image advertising in-game products like Stunderwear, which you can just see by, I don't know, loading the level. Yeah. And collecting every last nibbler in the game, which, by the way, if you miss one replaying levels, does not save collectible progress either, so you would need to play the level and get them all over again in one run. Collecting every one of them gives you a commercial for Futurama Season 3 on DVD. Yeah, oh, and also one of the final cutscenes from the game is missing even if you collect everything in the game, so enjoy that thought. Just between all of that and the game surprisingly not having all that many cutscenes from the moment you enter level 2 all the way through the end of Fry's section of the game, I wouldn't blame you for putting Futurama down half an hour in. Hell, even the actual showrunner, when capturing the story for the DVD episode cut years and years later, he used cheats to skip some levels and unlock all of the cutscenes because some parts of this game are just needlessly tight. The first 10 minutes or so are great, mostly because 5+ minutes of that is solely cutscene, only to have the subsequent hour and change feel so much longer than that. This section was so lengthy and storyless to the point that there was a joke written in at one point in the story, highlighting that Fry spent all of this time going through the sewers and old New York, but the pawn shop was only 2 blocks away from the Planet Express building where he started. I'm guessing that felt too much like a slap in the face to players for them to include, which makes me question some of the slaps in the face they include later. We'll get there. It's kind of a recurring issue throughout the whole game, where you might go 3 to 4 levels without any proper cutscenes, and those cutscenes may just be 2 unnamed enemies talking to one another for a brief, 10-second clip.
So, how was your power downtime?
Great, but you know, toward the end of it, I was itching to get back to work.
Those levels in question, they may only total 20 minutes of game time, but because you've progressed through so many areas, it'll feel like you should be getting more than just the bare minimum of the story. Like, this should feel like more of a video game episode of the show, rather than an episode of the show that just happens to have an hour of filler game in place of commercial breaks. However, there's often just enough here to keep you going, and it's not actively offensive to play or anything, so if we're in 2003 and we really want more Futurama, we might stick through it, hoping that maybe it'll improve, and to be fair, it does with Bender's section of the game, though not really by much, as the gameplay improves proportionally to the level theming. That said, it's an inverse proportion, going from mostly inspired New York City blocks as Fry, into a bland mountain desert kind of level as Bender. After Fry returns with the dark matter engine, the gang flees Earth, and Mom reveals that she's turned Earth into a giant spaceship, which she finds out doesn't have enough fuel to actually go anywhere without that same dark matter engine that Fry and Leela and Bender and Farnsworth just took. So she follows with a smaller ship and traps the fleeing Planet Express crew on an asteroid using a suck ray. Their words, not mine. Bender ends up freaking out, afraid that they're all going to die, so he jumps out of the ship and dies before the toaster revives him, and Farnsworth tasks him with disabling the suck ray in exchange for some smutty robot magazines. Again, the episode part of this game alone is just great fun.
Bender, you mechanical marvel! Are you there?
What? Who said that? Is it God?
No, though I'm as old as him.
Oh, hey, Professor. What are you doing inside my head?
I'm transmitting over your internal radio. Hello?
And thankfully, the game goes from pretty disappointing to maybe mostly inoffensive starting around this point. Bender's levels end up feeling much more like your token platformer, complete with a Crash Bandicoot giant boulder chase sequence. You'd sort of expect him to be the one that uses guns though, right? I'm not crazy. Or at least a fire burp, but instead he's got a couple melee attacks and a special spin move, along with the classic platformer butt slam. Enemies once again take way too many hits to kill, especially this really out-of-place rock monster, and there are a couple platforming sections in this asteroid's mining facility that just feel tedious for the sake of it, like an excessively long disappearing block section, followed by an even longer one immediately after. Mega Man fans, eat your heart out. But by and large, these levels are still fun despite being about as rote as platformer levels can be. There's just enough here that, like with Fry's section of the game, the first bits that I remember are the promise more than the execution. Although he may start off pretty basic, Bender's final few levels get a little bit more creative, if only in sight gags really. But combined with that Futurama charm that the game does have, it shows that there's almost something here. I don't know that this random studio, after seemingly 2+ years of full production, would ever have been the one to do a Futurama game justice, but I mean, where else are you gonna get a crashed spaceship with the skeletal remains of an alien Elvis, or robots made using bones instead of metal because that makes them more explicitly evil? If nothing else, they captured the vibe of Futurama really well, and perhaps due to circumstance, or maybe the show being cancelled, or maybe any level of outside factors, they just didn't have the juice to deliver much more than average to okay gameplay. So once Bender disables the suck beam, Mom foils their plans by capturing Farnsworth, putting his head in a jar, and launching the Planet Express ship into the sun. The sun, not her sons. In perhaps the most Futurama part of this episode, it turns out that the sun actually has a surface for them to land on, and a species of sun people who conveniently have the dark matter they would need to refuel and get to the corner of the universe. But while the jokes and story beats really hit that groove here,
Whoa, check it out!
Be careful, Fry. You're not supposed to look directly at the sun.
Leela's section ends up being the least story-focused of them all, to the point that in the lost episode cut of these scenes, they just cut to her defeating the evil sun god and then they fly away. 5 levels worth of puzzle solving and enemy kicking, and genuinely zero story to show for it. Her section is actually pretty fun too, as they give her a couple proper combos and a dodge roll befitting of her skills in the show. The levels end up being very bland and samey visually, since the entire time on the sun is spent in this temple aligning some lighthouses to get into the temple's center, but some of these Indiana Jones-esque traps really impressed me. There's one room that's just a mad dash across a string of platforms that are sinking into lava, and although the walkways are super narrow and anxiety-inducing, this time it feels earned. It's perfectly paced so that the first 2 sets of platforms have some leeway, but by the end, even at full speed, you feel like you've barely made it to the other side. It's perfect. And then they do it again with regular platforming and having to slowly climb your way up blocks using the climb animation, and I'm really only highlighting this room because it reminds me of Tiny Kong's DK64 boss fight, and I didn't like that boss fight very much, so, carry on. Other rooms have some pattern memorization puzzles, which would be fine if not for Leela's feet sliding slightly too far on her every movement, resetting the puzzle and activating a trap if you dare slide even a pixel onto the wrong switch. Don't get me wrong, the puzzles rarely move past basic like the rest of the game, but there was at least a different level of satisfaction from playing as Leela than you would have gotten from wiping out enemies at 7 frames per second as Fry, or by doing basic jumping as Bender. It's just a shame that the repetitive visual design of the temple levels, the only cutscenes being 5 seconds of 2 enemies making small talk, and the only task being, go activate a light switch, okay now go do that 4 or 5 more times, make her section overstay its welcome. It'd be the best part of the game if it weren't the least necessary. Also, who allowed this to be her death scream? But we're in the final act of the show part of the game now, as the Planet Express crew makes its way to the planet of Bogad to meet with Farnsworth's old mentor named Adoy, so that they can find a way to go back in time and stop Farnsworth from having sold Planet Express in the first place. These are... it's Dagobah and Yoda backwards. This part is where some of that absurd Futurama science starts to kick into gear, as Adoy has made 2 time machines here on Bogad in his time in exile or whatever. One which takes 2 minutes to crank it, only for it to send you exactly 2 minutes back in time, which is just beautiful, and another which is a regular time machine, except that the switches that you need to activate it are far away from the machine itself, because reasons. Incidentally, Zoidberg is here, for some reason.
I can't imagine what kind of disgusting, foul creatures we'll find here.
Hello!
And for exactly 1 mission, he's a playable character in one of those Crash Bandicoot hog riding missions. Now, I had to look this up afterwards to make sure I wasn't too crazy, but from what I read, this is where a ton of players hit a wall, because Zoidberg's controls are kind of finicky. His collision detection is off, so you'll clip an obstacle and die even if you genuinely aren't that close to it, and best of all, you're on a cumulative 2-minute timer. There are 3 sections in this level where the timer does reset to 2 minutes, and if you hit something, you'll reset a few steps back from where you died, but the timer for that chapter of the level does not reset. If you don't reach the checkpoint in 2 total minutes, including the time that you spent dying and respawning, you will fail the mission, and this can get tighter than Lobster Boy here trying to pack himself into a new shell. Once the time machine is activated, the gang leaves the planet and speeds back to Earth, leaving Zoidberg behind to explain why he's on Bogad when the time loop completes itself. Don't ask how he got there in the first place.
So what should I do now, guys? Hello? Friends? Hello? Hello?
The time-traveling Planet Express ship crash lands right next to the past's Planet Express ship, which was normal and not broken, and then they take the good one to avoid causing any paradoxes, explaining why the one that we see at the start of the game is broken. When they get to MomCorp, we get 1 final level each for our heroes as they work together to activate switches so that the next person can activate more switches, all while running from attacks from Mom's giant killer robot, Destructo. In the case of Fry and Leela's levels, this also entails grabbing more door keycards than every Doom game combined. This final rush, it's fine enough. It's probably got the most creative platforming in the game so far, and it does feel admittedly satisfying playing as Fry finally, since they gave him a railgun that just destroys everything instantly. But visually, the entire thing is just running through a few bland, repetitive corridors, and all of the all-your-base Easter eggs in the world can't make up for uninspired visual design, and honestly, uninspired game design, where you're supposed to run back and forth grabbing the door number 5 keycard from door number 3 to unlock the way to get the door number 8 keycard behind door number 5, and so on. The video game part of this video game ends with a battle against Destructo, where after stumbling around confused for a while thinking that you have to do something with the different door switches, you'll eventually realize that you're just an idiot and you have to shoot Destructo in the stomach during this one specific attack that fires homing drones at you. They do give you infinite health and ammo vending machines at least, so Fry has all the slurm he wants, but after every other boss sequence in this game involves you never actually attacking the boss directly, instead using outside tools or switches to win, you would think that a game that has the characters chatting so frequently during gameplay would tell you that this time you're actually supposed to engage directly. With Destructo defeated, one of Mom's kids accidentally happens to knock over the toaster, so it breaks, leading to this hilarious ending to an episode that ends up feeling like an insulting end to a 4-hour game.
Bummer. We'll just have to be careful not to die from now on.
You had to say that!
Oh, damn it, Mom! No one kills my crew except for me! You're going down!
Oh, please. You wouldn't hit a lady.
I suppose you're right, though I would do this.
You broke my hip!
I don't care. You wanted Planet Express so you could take over the universe, eh? Well, I guess your evil plan is foiled now, thanks to my time-traveling crew.
But you have to sell Planet Express to me. Your crew said it happened, and no one can alter the continuum of time.
Oh yeah? Watch me. The deal is off.
Oh. Well, how about if I throw in this hat?
Good news, everyone! I've sold Planet Express to Mom.
The idea of the video game being a perfect time loop all the way down to level 1 restarting the moment the credits finish, meaning that you would just play the game over and over and over again, it's pretty cool on paper if, say, your collection progress saved at all. Obviously, that wouldn't make as much narrative sense, but they never once acknowledge the nibblers or the collectibles in the episode's story anyway, and they also don't acknowledge why there are several hundred of the same nibbler, so that's a whole issue in its own. It's okay to take a tiny bit of liberty sometimes, is what I'm saying. In practice, it kinda just feels like you're the joke for having played the game, only to end up exactly back at the start with genuinely zero to show for it. The episode itself, due to being a contained time loop, also doesn't really end up fitting in the canon of the Futurama story, so I'm kinda surprised that at the very end they didn't throw in a Tales of Interest outro or something just to wrap it up a bit more nicely. I don't know, Futurama's always been excellent at closing or addressing plot discrepancies like that, and considering that the story was made by the actual Futurama team, you'd expect a little more. Again, though, as an episode of the show, outside of not being technically canon, it actually fits right in. It's funny, it's witty, it plays with its own rules in a clever way. When consumed just as television, it actually paces pretty well despite being cut up and thrown into a video game. Even the time loop is only a step or two away from being just as clever an end to the game part of the game, and there's some level of cosmic humor to the last piece of Futurama media at the time, being this endless cycle for you to consume forever while you hoped you would get something more substantial in the future. But since the game part only serves as fluff, that's all it is. It's a looping holdover for a continuation that we did thankfully end up getting, and it's a time loop story that's markedly less satisfying than every other one the show's done both before and since. As much as I may have this urge to give Futurama the game a bit of credit for eliciting a nostalgic feeling out of me despite me never having played it before, since it's only fluff, there's nowadays not a great reason to interact with this episode outside of watching the Lost Adventure DVD cut on YouTube. Or buying the DVD, I guess. In that form, it's a cool bonus episode. It holds up to that Lost Adventure moniker, and it is admittedly funny seeing how the edited TV version cuts around needing gameplay. Like, for example, Farnsworth tells Fry to go to the pawn shop, and where in the video game the shop guy gives it to you with some random pointless dialogue, here, Fry just robs the place, and an hour of gameplay is waved away in an instant. Bender's section is just a bad montage, and Leela's section genuinely doesn't exist at all. It's almost funnier seeing this TV cut version of the episode because of the contempt it feels like it has for the gameplay. But as far as licensed tie-ins go, it does stand out as one where the care the original producers put in shows, and it outshines anything the contracted game dev could have made. The CG animation hasn't aged super well, admittedly, but beyond that, it fits right in with real episodes of the show, and as a fun fact, these cutscenes are the first piece of Futurama media to be filmed, or I guess made, in the HD 16:9 aspect ratio. But again, in the same breath, it does feel like the studio tried, they just weren't the right studio for the job. Futurama The Lost Adventure may not be that good of a video game, but it is anything but lazy, and maybe that's part of why I have this weird respect for it. Any chance the Futurama team is given, they seem to go all out, whether it's here, the lengthy run of comics that you didn't know existed. I've even heard the now-dead Futurama freemium cash-in game that was on smartphones at least had fun writing. Their passion for this universe, it always shows. Now I hope that statement doesn't age poorly when the Hulu reboot drops in 2 months. If it does age poorly, just rewind the video 10 seconds and end it there. As always, until next time, stay golden.
Farewell, big blue ball of idiots!
A special thanks to my wonderful crew of Patreon supporters for helping make videos like this possible. If you'd like your name on this list along with access to the exclusive Discord server, early and ad-free videos, and more, you can do so for as little as $1 a month over at patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. Thank you.